At the end of the day, the house is doing what it always does, humming softly. 2 plates sit in the sink, a sitcom laughs in the background, and 2 phones glow like small private rooms. You are sitting 3 feet from your spouse, close enough to hear their breathing, yet the space between you feels like a locked door. The question rises, simple and risky, how are you, really? But it stalls in your throat because you already know the answer you usually get. Fine. Tired. Busy. You try anyway. Not with a speech. Just a small reach. A comment about your day. A hand on their shoulder. An invitation to look up for 1 second. They nod without looking. Answer the practical part. Then slide back into the screen or the to-do list. What lands first is not anger. It is that familiar pinch of self-doubt. The quick inner negotiation. Maybe I am too much. Maybe I asked wrong. Maybe I should not need this tonight. So you edit yourself in real time, becoming easier, quieter, smaller. Loneliness in marriage often begins as a low-grade disappointment, then slowly hardens into private grief. Feeling lonely in marriage is rarely about being physically alone. It is the emotional mismatch between what you reach for and what comes back. The gap between your inner life and the relationship's ability or willingness to hold it. It can feel like being invisible while still being responsible, like living inside a home that does not emotionally shelter you. Many people describe it as a quiet exposure, as if their thoughts, fears, and joys have nowhere to land. The mind starts producing familiar scripts. I should be grateful. Other couples have it worse. Maybe I am too sensitive. If I bring this up, I will sound needy or dramatic. So the loneliness often hides under normal-looking behavior. You overfunction, you stay busy, you keep the peace, you become the easy spouse. You scroll at night, you joke, you work late, you fill silence with tasks because tasks do not reject you. From the outside, the marriage can look stable. Conflict might be low, teamwork might be high, bills paid, kids managed, schedules synced. That is what makes it so disorienting. The relationship is operational, but emotional contact is thin. Solitude can be chosen and restoring, a space where you return to yourself. Loneliness is unchosen and draining, a slow erosion of feeling known. Marriage can amplify loneliness because it is not just a relationship, it is a psychological contract. Even when no one says it out loud, many people enter marriage believing something sacred and specific. This person will know me, choose me, and keep returning to me as a place of emotional home. Over time, that contract can go unrenewed. Responsibilities multiply, routines harden, and the couple keeps functioning, but the relational promises quietly expire. That is where the expectation gap forms. The distance between what the marriage is supposed to provide and what it actually provides day to day. The grief is subtle at first, because you are not missing a person in the literal sense. You are missing the version of the relationship you believed you were building. The future self who felt safe, understood, and held. Then, shame adds a second weight. If I am lonely in a marriage, something must be wrong with me. If I admit it, I sound ungrateful, dramatic, or impossible to satisfy. And when you compare your private emptiness to other couples' highlights, the loneliness starts to feel like personal failure. The pain is not only the absence of connection, it is the constant proximity to what you cannot reach. At the core of loneliness in marriage is not just a lack of conversation or affection. It is the nervous system and the mind trying to answer one question over and over. Am I emotionally safe here? Different people experience the same relationship in radically different ways because they bring different wiring, different expectations, and different protective strategies into the bond. 4 psychological lenses help explain why loneliness can feel so persistent, even when both partners insist they are trying. First is attachment, which is less about labels and more about how your body learned to look for security. When closeness feels uncertain, the brain treats it like a threat and starts scanning for proof that you matter. For someone with an anxious pattern, connection often feels fragile. They may check tone, timing, and facial expression for reassurance, and a small dip in attention can create a surge of panic. Even after a warm moment, the hunger can return quickly because the nervous system is not convinced the warmth will last. For someone with an avoidant pattern, self-reliance becomes an identity. Vulnerability feels exposed. Closeness feels like pressure, and distance feels like control. They may love their spouse and still pull back the moment emotions get intense, because intensity registers as demand. The tragic loop is that the anxious spouse reaches forward to feel safe, while the avoidant spouse steps back to feel safe, and both actions confirm the other person's worst fear. One reads withdrawal as abandonment, the other reads pursuit as being trapped. Loneliness grows on both sides. The anxious partner feels alone because they cannot get consistent emotional contact. The avoidant partner feels alone because they feel reduced to a role, a responder, a problem to solve, rather than seen as a whole person. The second lens is rejection sensitivity, which is what happens when the mind learns to expect that closeness will be denied. It does not require dramatic rejection. Sometimes it develops from years of subtle dismissal, or from early experiences where needs were met unpredictably. In marriage, rejection sensitivity makes neutral moments feel loaded. A delayed response, a brief answer, distracted eye contact, a partner turning toward a screen can all register as a message. You are not wanted right now. Once that interpretation lands, the body reacts as if it is protecting you from humiliation. Some people respond by over-explaining, adding details, softening every sentence, trying to prevent misunderstanding before it happens. Others respond by shutting down, going quiet, or becoming cold, not because they do not care, but because caring feels dangerous. The brain becomes a meaning-making machine, and silence is never empty. Silence gets filled with story, and the story is usually harsh. I am too much. I am boring. They regret choosing me. Over time, the marriage becomes a place where reaching out feels like stepping onto unstable ground, so the person reaches less. The spouse sees less initiation and assumes everything is fine. The lonely partner is not fine. They are simply avoiding the risk of feeling rejected again. The third lens is emotional neglect inside the relationship, which is painful precisely because it often leaves no obvious bruise. Emotional neglect is not always cruelty. It can be chronic inattention. Two people moving through life without noticing each other's inner world. Couples connect through bids for connection, small invitations that say, "Come closer to me." A bid can be a joke, a sigh, a story about the day, a question that is not really about information, but about presence. When those bids are repeatedly missed, ignored, or met with practical problem solving instead of empathy, the person learns a quiet lesson. My inner world does not land here. They may still be loved in a functional sense. They may be supported financially, co-parented with, respected in public, yet, emotionally, they feel unsheltered. A common adaptation is to become highly competent and low need. They stop asking for comfort. They stop expressing disappointment. They become the spouse who handles everything, because handling feels safer than hoping. But the need does not disappear. It simply goes underground. They stop needing in public and keep needing in private. Over time, the marriage can start to feel like a roommate situation with history, shared responsibilities, and a growing absence of being emotionally met. The fourth lens is self-silencing and people-pleasing, which can turn loneliness into a long-term cost of being easy to live with. Some people preserve the relationship by shrinking inside it. They anticipate their partner's moods, manage the emotional climate, smooth conflict before it surfaces, and swallow their own disappointment to keep things calm. They become experts at making the relationship stable, often at the expense of making it real. Underneath this is an invisible deal. If I ask for less, I will be left less. If I am low maintenance, I will be safe. If I do not complain, I will be chosen. The short-term payoff is fewer fights and fewer ruptures. The long-term consequence is profound. Being liked for your compliance feels nothing like being loved for your truth. The more you edit yourself to stay acceptable, the more the relationship becomes a performance, and performance is inherently lonely because it requires distance from your authentic emotions. Eventually, the loneliness shifts from situational to existential. Even if your spouse is physically close, you are not fully there, and a part of you knows it. The loneliest marriages are not always the loudly broken ones. They are the ones where each person has learned a survival strategy that blocks the very closeness they crave. Loneliness in marriage is rarely just a personality issue. It often lives inside repeatable relationship patterns that quietly train two people to stop reaching. Once you can see the pattern, the loneliness starts to look less like a mystery and more like a system doing what it has learned to do. One of the most common systems is the pursuer-distancer cycle. One partner initiates contact, brings up feelings, asks for closeness. The other retreats, changes the subject, gets busy, or goes quiet. The initiator escalates, not because they want drama, but because subtle requests did not work and being ignored hurts. The other partner shuts down, not because they do not care, but because the emotional intensity feels like pressure and pressure feels unsafe. Both then interpret the other through a moral lens. The pursuer thinks, "You are selfish, you do not value me." The distancer thinks, "You are never satisfied, you want to control me." Neither sees the other as afraid. And the longer the cycle repeats, the more loneliness becomes evidence for a private story. I am alone in this, even with someone sitting right here. Another pattern is conflict avoidance and polite distance. Low conflict can look like harmony, but sometimes it is emotional shutdown with good manners. The marriage becomes efficient. Calendars, chores, logistics, kids, bills, everything runs, but almost nothing is felt out loud. When a couple avoids difficult conversations, they also avoid the kind of honesty that creates intimacy. Raw feelings have nowhere to go, so they either leak out as irritability or disappear into numbness. The relationship starts to reward emotional neutrality, and closeness starves. Then there is parallel living, where routine replaces relationship. Two people share space but not experience. Separate screens, separate stress, separate hobbies, quick updates instead of real confiding. Life becomes something you manage next to each other rather than something you enter together. Over time, the spouse becomes someone you report to, not someone you reveal yourself to. The home stays full, but the marriage feels empty. Finally, loneliness is often reinforced by invisible labor and quiet resentment. Emotional labor includes remembering what matters, planning connection, tracking needs, smoothing tension, keeping the relationship's emotional weather stable. When one person becomes the manager of closeness, they eventually feel tired and unseen. Without appreciation, that labor turns heavy, then bitter. Resentment transforms affection into obligation, and obligation is a poor substitute for intimacy. In that climate, both partners can start protecting themselves. One stops asking, the other stops noticing, and loneliness settles in because no one is tending the bridge between them. One reason marital loneliness can last for years is that it is surprisingly hard to name. People build defenses around it, not because they are dishonest, but because admitting the truth threatens their sense of identity and stability. Shame is usually the first defense. If I say I am lonely, it means I chose wrong, I failed, or I am unlovable. That shame pushes the pain inward, where it can be managed privately but not repaired relationally. Then comes minimizing. You compare your situation to couples who fight constantly, or to marriages with betrayal, and you tell yourself you have no right to feel hurt. The loneliness gets disqualified, which only makes it sharper. Another common narrative is fantasy bonding. Instead of facing what is happening now, you stay loyal to what used to happen. You hold on to old memories, shared milestones, inside jokes, and the idea of who you are together. And that idea becomes a substitute for present-day closeness. It keeps hope alive, but it can also keep you from asking hard questions. Overfunctioning is another protective strategy. If you do more, give more, carry more, then maybe you will become worth choosing. The marriage becomes a performance of competence, and the reward you are chasing is not praise, but intimacy. When it does not arrive, you work harder, and the cycle deepens. Eventually, repeated missed attempts can create learned helplessness. You stop trying, because trying hurts more than silence. Your body starts associating vulnerability with disappointment, so you keep your needs vague, your requests rare, your emotions contained. And if you have built your identity around being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who does not need much, that identity becomes a trap. You are praised for your toughness while privately starving for tenderness. What helps is treating loneliness as data rather than a verdict. The goal is not to prove who is right, but to understand what your nervous system is asking for and what the relationship is currently structured to provide. Start individually by naming the need with precision. Not just connection, but what kind. Comfort after a hard day, attention without multitasking, affection that feels warm instead of obligatory, conversation that goes beyond logistics, playfulness, sexual closeness, reassurance, or simple curiosity about your inner world. Then track when loneliness spikes. Notice what preceded it, what you told yourself, and what you did next. This turns a vague ache into something you can work with. It also helps to separate need from accusation. A need is a signal that something matters. It is not a diagnosis of your spouse's character. Practice making direct requests that are small and time-bound, because clarity reduces defensiveness. Can we sit together for 10 minutes after dinner with no phones? Lands differently than "you never talk to me." And build support outside the marriage so your spouse is not the only emotional outlet. External connection reduces pressure and increases steadiness. As a couple, focus on repeatable contact rather than grand gestures. Create a weekly ritual that is low pressure, like a walk, coffee, or a short check-in that is protected from screens. Use impact language instead of character language. Describe what the behavior does to you, not what it means about who they are. When we talk while you are scrolling, "I feel like I do not matter," opens more doors than "you are selfish." Learn repair attempts, quick ways to return after disconnection, even if it is imperfect, because repair builds safety. And relearn bids. Start noticing small invitations and responding to them with presence, even briefly, because intimacy is built in tiny moments. If conversations repeatedly collapse into blame or shutdown, structured help can matter. Framing therapy as skill building instead of crisis response reduces shame. And if contempt, ongoing betrayal, or emotional cruelty are present, prioritize safety and clarity before trying to rebuild closeness. Loneliness is information about disconnection, not proof that you are unlovable. The next step is not becoming tougher or more independent. It is becoming more truthful, starting with yourself, then deciding what kind of connection you will no longer pretend you can live without.